Space, it's supposed to be silent. A vast, black ocean dotted with islands of fire, all of it, quiet. We thought that silence was a void. An emptiness. We were wrong. It wasn't empty. It was listening. And we were the ones who finally made a sound. It wasn't a weapon that did it. It wasn't a fleet or a superweapon or some grand declaration of war. It was a word. A single, solitary word that we've been whispering to ourselves for millennia, never knowing the power it held. Our name. Humanity's true name. They call what happened next, the unnaming. We just call it the day the universe got a taste of what we really are, and it flinched. Let me take you back. The year was 2247. We weren't top of the galactic food chain. Far from it. We were the newcomers, the upstarts, the primitives. The Galactic Federation, a collection of 1,000 different species, all older, all wiser, all more technologically advanced, they tolerated us. They gave us a little corner of the Orion Arm, a few trade agreements, and a patronizing pat on the head. They called us the Youngers. We thought it was a term of endearment. It wasn't. It was a classification. I was there, on the Federation's main linguistic archive station, the Vault of Voices. My job was simple. I was a xenolinguist, a translator. My team's mission was to help them integrate our messy, chaotic human languages into their perfect, unified database. It was tedious work. They saw our languages as a fascinating, almost pathological disorder. We had thousands of tongues, countless words for the same thing, poetry, slang, layers of meaning they just couldn't compute. They found it inefficient. Illogical. But then, we found the old archive. A part of the vault so ancient, so encrypted, that most of the current species didn't even have the key. We found it by accident, a glitch in a power conduit. Inside, it wasn't like their modern data. It was history. The deep history. The kind that gets buried for a reason. It spoke of a time before the Federation. A time of creators, of beings of such immense power they could weave reality from thought and stitch galaxies together with song. And it spoke of their weapon. Their ultimate, fail-safe weapon. They didn't destroy their enemies. They unmade them. They discovered the fundamental resonance of a consciousness, the unique vibrational pattern that defined a species' soul. They found its name. Its true name. And to speak that name with intent, was to erase it. The archive called it the lexicon of ruin. And it said the creators, fearing their own power, shattered the lexicon and scattered the syllables across the universe, hiding them in the one place no one would ever think to look, inside the chaotic, evolving, unconscious minds of the species that would come after them. The moment I read that, my blood went cold. A deep, instinctual fear, something older than my own species, kicked in. I didn't say anything to my Federation overseers. I couldn't. I just started running simulations, cross-referencing our human linguistic models with the theoretical structure of these true names. It was my partner who figured it out. She was a neurologist, and she was studying the unique brainwave patterns of humans during deep meditation and peak emotional states. She found a constant. A specific, complex frequency that every single human brain produced, a subconscious hum that was as unique to us as a fingerprint. It was a song we were all singing, every second of every day, without ever knowing it. We took that frequency and fed it through the old archive's translation matrix. It was a terrifying gamble. The screen flickered, algorithms struggling to process something so fundamentally alien to the clean, logical patterns of every other species. And then, it displayed a single, swirling glyph. It wasn't in any human language. It was something else. Something pure. It was us. All of us. The sum total of every human joy, every tear, every act of love and brutality, every dream we ever had, distilled into one, perfect, terrifying sound. We had just found humanity's true name. And we had no idea what to do with it. Do you tell someone you found a loaded gun pointed at the heart of creation? We argued for days, locked in our lab. Do we destroy the data? Bury it? Or, do we show the Federation? Prove that we aren't the youngers. That we carry a legacy they can't even comprehend. We were fools. Arrogant, stupid fools. We requested an audience with the High Council. We stood before them, these ancient, majestic beings, their multifaceted eyes looking down on us with mild curiosity. I remember my hands shaking as I plugged the data chip into the terminal. I explained what we had found. I told them about the creators. About the lexicon. You could have heard a pin drop in that colossal chamber. The silence was heavy. Then, I played the recording. Not the name itself, no, we weren't that reckless. We played the frequency. That low, subconscious hum of 7 billion human souls. The effect was instantaneous. It wasn't an explosion. It was a rupture. The very light in the chamber seemed to bend. The council members, creatures of light and energy and solid matter, they flickered. For a fraction of a second, their forms became translucent, unstable. A wave of psychic feedback, a scream of pure, undiluted terror, slammed into our minds. Consoles shattered. The station's gravity faltered. And then, silence again. A deeper silence. The council members were frozen. Staring at us. But it wasn't the patronizing look from before. It wasn't curiosity. It was a look I had never seen in any of their species before. It was a primal, gut-wrenching, soul-deep fear. They were looking at us, and they weren't seeing the youngers anymore. They were seeing the children of the gods who broke reality. They were seeing the inheritors of the silence. They didn't say a word. They just retreated. The entire Federation went quiet. Communication ceased. Trade stopped. Our ships were escorted to the border, not with threats, but with a terrified, frantic urgency. That was 6 months ago. Now, we sit on our little blue world, looking up at the stars. But the stars are different now. They're not points of light anymore. They're eyes. Watching us. The galaxy has given our condition a name. They call it Onomonophobia. The fear of a word. The fear of our word. They know what we are now. They know the syllable we hold in our hearts, a syllable with the power to shatter stars. And they live in fear of the day we finally stop humming, and decide to speak. The silence from the stars was the loudest sound I've ever heard. For the first few weeks, we told ourselves it was just shock. That the Federation was deliberating. That they needed time to process the revelation. We were like children who'd found our parents' old war medals and didn't understand the weight of them, only that the adults in the room had gone very, very quiet. But quiet doesn't last. It gets filled. It started with the dreams. Not for everyone, but for those of us who were there, in that council chamber. For me, and for my partner. We'd wake up in the dead of night, our hearts hammering against our ribs, the echo of that psychic scream from the council still ringing in a part of our minds that wasn't quite our own. It wasn't a sound you hear with your ears. It was a feeling. The feeling of a foundation, 1 billion years old, cracking. My partner, she changed. The brilliant neurologist who'd pieced together the frequency started jumping at shadows. She'd stare at her own hands for hours, like she was waiting for them to dissolve into light, just like the council members had flickered. They didn't just hear a sound, she'd whisper to me, her voice thin and frayed. They saw it. They saw what we are, underneath the skin and the bone. And it terrified them. We were quarantined, of course. Not in a prison, but in a gilded cage, a high-security research facility in the Swiss Alps, buried under a kilometer of rock. For our protection, they said. For everyone else's, they meant. The governments of Earth, what was left of the United Nations, they treated us like we were holding a live grenade. They wanted to understand the weapon, but they were too scared to look at it. They brought in teams. Physicists, philosophers, even poets. They had us repeat the story 100 times. They ran the frequency through every supercomputer on the planet, trying to break it down, to understand its structure. But it was like trying to dissect a feeling. The moment you tried to pull it apart, it just fell apart. The data was there, the math was perfect, but the essence of it, the meaning, was like smoke. It only held its shape when you looked at it as a whole. That's when the first theory emerged, the one that made my blood run colder than the mountain outside. It wasn't a weapon we had found. It was an identity. A definition. The creators, those ancient beings, they didn't just name things, they defined them. A star is a star because its true name says, fusion and gravity and light. A rock is a rock because its name says, solid and silent and old. Humanity's true name, it didn't say, death or destruction. The linguists, the ones brave enough to study the glyph, said it was far, far worse. It was a concept they couldn't fully translate, but the closest they got was unbound potential. Think about that. Not a fixed state. Not a peaceful, stable thing. Potential. The capacity for infinite change. For limitless growth. For becoming anything. Everything. We were a species that had gone from cave paintings to quantum theory in a geological blink. We were a people capable of breathtaking compassion and bottomless cruelty. We dreamed of heavens and engineered hells. We were chaos. We were change incarnate. And to a universe of ancient, stable, defined civilizations, that was the most terrifying thing imaginable. Stability is their god, and we are the atheists with a bomb. The Federation's silence broke after 3 months. It wasn't a message. It was a data packet, broadcast on every frequency, from every one of their listening posts at the edge of our space. No words. Just a single, looping video. It showed a star system about 100 light-years away. A system inhabited by the Xylos, a species of gentle, silicon-based lifeforms that looked like walking crystalline trees. We'd had minimal contact with them. They were peaceful. Philosophers. In the video, a single, human-made probe, a early Voyager-style relic from centuries ago, drifted into the outer reaches of their system. It was inert, dead for 100 years. But as it crossed an invisible boundary, a Xylos research ship approached it. Standard procedure. They were probably just curious. And then it happened. The moment the Xylos ship got within a few kilometers of the probe, the video was flooded with a blinding white light. Not from an explosion. From the Xylos ship itself. It came apart. Not in a fiery blast, but silently, its crystalline structure unraveling into shimmering dust, like a sandcastle washed away by a wave. An instant later, the entire Xylos homeworld, a beautiful, glittering jewel of a planet, began to pulse with the same awful light. And then, it too, simply, dissolved. The star it orbited went dark, not like a light switching off, but like a candle being smothered. The video ended. The message was clear. It wasn't an attack. It was a reaction. A reflex. The Xylos had gotten too close to an artifact that carried our resonance, our subconscious hum. They had brushed up against the edges of our unbound potential, and their stable, defined existence couldn't handle the contact. They were erased. Unmade. The Federation's message was simple. They were not afraid we would attack them. They were afraid we would breathe on them. We had become a plague. A cosmic pandemic. And the galaxy was instituting a cordon sanitaire. That's where we are now. Trapped on our own planet, not by a fleet, but by sheer, pants-wetting terror. Our own, and everyone else's. Every satellite, every deep space telescope, is trained on the edge of the solar system. We watch as they build it. Not a wall. You can't wall in a sound. It's a buffer zone. A light-year-wide emptiness, a quarantine field of nothing, swallowing up every star system within 50 light-years of Earth. They are carving us out of the galaxy. They are making us a void. My partner sits in the corner of our lab, most days. She just rocks back and forth, her arms wrapped around her knees. She looks at me sometimes, and her eyes are hollow. They're not afraid of the word, she said to me this morning, her voice a dry rustle. They're afraid of the breath that shapes it. They're afraid we'll exhale. And the most terrifying part. The part that keeps me awake, staring at the cold, hard ceiling of this bunker. I look out at a world that is now more divided than ever. Some people are building shelters, preparing for a war. Others are forming cults, worshipping the Syllable, calling it our divine right. And the governments, they are arguing. There's a faction, a powerful one, that thinks we should prove the Federation right. They think we should stop being afraid of our own shadow. They think we should stop humming, and finally, for the first time, speak our name aloud, on purpose. To show them what unbound potential really means. The tension is a physical thing now, a weight pressing down on all of us. We are sitting on a powder keg, and half the world is playing with a match, thinking it's a crown. The galaxy holds its breath, waiting to see if the monster in the cage will roar. And I am just a linguist, who found a word, and started the end of everything. The air in the bunker was so thick with fear you could almost chew it. That video of the Xylos system dissolving replayed behind my eyes every time I blinked. It wasn't an attack. It was an allergic reaction. The universe was allergic to us. Down here, the arguments had turned into a low, constant hum, just like the one our brains supposedly emitted. It was tearing us apart. One faction, led by a grim-faced general, saw our name as the ultimate deterrent. They fear a whisper, he'd growl, his fists clenched. Let's show them what a shout can do. We dictate terms. Our survival, guaranteed. He talked about projecting stability, which was a military way of saying, hold the galaxy hostage. The other side, the isolationists, wanted us to go quiet. Permanently. They proposed a radical procedure, a global neurological dampening field that would, in theory, suppress the unique resonance in our brains. It would lobotomize our entire species, turn our chaotic, beautiful, terrifying human potential into something quieter, something safer. Something the galaxy wouldn't need to fear. They were willing to erase our souls to save our skins. My partner hadn't spoken in days. She just sat by the wall, tracing the swirling glyph of our true name on the floor with her finger, over and over. It was her mantra, her nightmare. She was the one who had first understood the frequency, and now the weight of it was crushing her. I'd try to talk to her, to bring her back, but she'd just look at me with those hollow eyes and whisper, the silence is better. The silence is kind. I was trapped in the middle, a ghost in my own life. I'd started this. My curiosity, my arrogance, had unlocked this box. Now, I was expected to have an opinion on whether we should use the monster inside to rule the cosmos or kill it to appease our jailers. I had no answers. Only a cold, sinking dread that whatever we chose would be wrong. Then, the decision was taken from us. It was 3:47. The alarms that blared through the bunker weren't the standard drills. This was a shrill, piercing shriek I'd only ever heard in theory, the galactic quarantine breach alarm. We scrambled to the command center, a room of flickering holoscreens and panicked voices. The main screen showed the live feed from the edge of the solar system. The buffer zone, that vast emptiness they were building, was shimmering. And something was coming through. It wasn't a warship. It was a single, small vessel. Its design was unlike anything in the Federation databases, all sharp, organic angles and shifting, iridescent colors. It moved with a purpose that felt final. This wasn't a scout. It was a scalpel. The general was barking orders, demanding our planetary defenses go live. The isolationists were screaming that any aggressive action would be seen as a confirmation of our threat. Chaos. And then, the communication came. Not a broadcast. A direct, tight beam message, routed solely to my console. It was for me. The linguist. The being on the screen was ancient. Its form was hard to look at, a shifting pattern of light and shadow that hinted at a shape my brain couldn't quite process. It didn't speak. Its words simply formed in my mind, cold and precise, like stones dropping into a still pond. Asterisk, we are the remnant. The last children of the creators. We are the ones who hid the lexicon. We have watched you. Your unbound potential is a flaw in the code of reality. A variable that cannot be controlled. The Xylos were a miscalculation. A test of proximity. You are the anomaly. Asterisk. My blood turned to ice. The Xylos, their destruction wasn't an accident. It was an experiment. They were lab rats, used to see just how contagious we were. Asterisk, the younger races fear your name. We understand its function. You are a recursive error. You do not simply exist, you redefine existence around you. You are a cancer in the body of the cosmos. A cure must be administered. Asterisk. The cure. Their ship began to pulse with a soft, gray light. Readings went wild. It wasn't building up power for a weapon. It was doing something far worse. It was emitting a counterfrequency. A wave of absolute, perfect definition. It was the conceptual opposite of our unbound potential. It was a command for stillness, for silence, for an end to all change. It was the sound of being unnamed. On the screen, we saw its effect. A small, barren moon near the ship's trajectory didn't explode. It stabilized. Its chaotic, pockmarked surface smoothed into a perfect, featureless gray sphere. All its history, all its unique craters and valleys, were erased in an instant. It was still matter, but it was no longer a moon. It was just stuff. They weren't here to destroy Earth. They were here to fix us. To smooth out our chaotic humanity into something quiet, stable, and defined. To cure the universe of the human disease. Panic erupted. The general gave the order. A salvo of our fastest interplanetary missiles, tipped with planet-buster warheads, streaked towards the ship. We watched, our hearts in our throats, as they closed in. The missiles, complex machines of furious potential energy and precise engineering, flew into the edge of the gray field. They didn't detonate. They simply, streamlined. Their sharp noses blunted. Their fiery trails snuffed out. They became simple, inert lumps of metal, falling uselessly through space. We were powerless. The remnant's ship didn't alter its course. It was coming for Earth. The gray wave was a slow, inexorable tide, and our world was the shore. That's when I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was my partner. She was standing, her face pale but her eyes were clear for the first time in months. They were filled with a terrible, heartbreaking resolve. She was looking at the glyph she had been tracing on the floor. She looked from the glyph, to the screen showing the approaching wave of nothingness, and then back to me. I was wrong, she said, her voice steady, though her hand trembled. Silence isn't the answer. It's just another kind of death. A cold realization washed over me. I knew what she was thinking. We all did. The general saw it as a weapon. The isolationists saw it as a curse. But she was the only one who had ever truly understood it as a name. The dampening field projectors, she said, her gaze locked with mine. We spent months building them to suppress our resonance. But they're just speakers. They can project sound as easily as they can silence it. The entire command center fell quiet. The implication hung in the air, heavier than any bomb. She wasn't talking about hiding our name anymore. She wasn't talking about using it as a threat. She was talking about answering the remnants' cure with the very thing they had come to erase. She was talking about speaking our name. Not a whisper. Not a shout. But an answer. The general was staring, his strategic mind racing, calculating the unimaginable. The isolationists were horrified, their hands over their mouths. The gray wave was getting closer. We could see its effect on the outer planets now, a blot of static on the edge of the solar system, swallowing the light. My partner turned to the control panel for the global dampening network. Her fingers hovered over the activation key. She looked at me, one last time, a silent question in her eyes. It was no longer a question of if. It was a question of who we would be, at the very end. The fate of every human soul now rested on a single, impossible choice, to be silently erased, or to speak our truth and risk shattering everything, including ourselves. The silence in the command center was a physical thing, a weight crushing the air from our lungs. My partner's finger hovered over the key that would turn our global dampeners into a microphone for our soul. To speak our name was to leap into an abyss, not knowing if we would fly or fall. The gray wave of stillness swept past Jupiter, and the giant planet didn't explode. It simplified. Its raging storm smoothed into a featureless, beige sphere. Its moons became perfect, identical marbles. The sight was more terrifying than any explosion. "Do it," the general growled, his face a mask of grim necessity. He saw only a final, desperate weapon. "You'll kill us all," an isolationist screamed, lurching forward. But my partner wasn't looking at them. Her eyes were locked on me, and in them, I saw the same terrifying, dawning realization I was feeling. This wasn't a weapon. A weapon is something you aim. A name is something you are. It's not a trigger, she whispered, her voice cutting through the panic. It's a key. Before anyone could move, a new alarm blared, a shrill, localized shriek from the deep-level bioscanners. They were tuned to monitor our resonance. The one we all emitted. And they were going insane. The main holoscreen flickered, the view of the approaching remnant ship replaced by a swirling, chaotic map of Earth. Every single human being on the planet was represented by a tiny, pulsing dot of light. And every single dot was getting brighter. Faster. The dull, subconscious hum of our species wasn't just a passive frequency anymore. It was a chorus beginning to warm up. It was reacting to the existential threat of the unnaming wave. We weren't deciding to speak our name. We were being forced to. Our very nature was rebelling against the silence trying to impose itself upon us. "The field is interacting with our resonance," a technician yelled, her voice cracking with hysteria. "It's not suppressing it, it's amplifying it. It's a feedback loop." The general stared, his strategic mind failing him. You can't negotiate with a reality you are breaking just by existing. The isolationists were frozen, their worst nightmare coming true not by choice, but by pure, uncontrollable biology. Their plan to silence us would have been like trying to dam a river with tissue paper. And then, the second twist, the one that turned my bones to water. The remnant ship stopped. It didn't slow down. It just ceased its advance, hanging in the void just inside the orbit of Mars. The gray wave of definition paused with it, a monstrous, still tidal wave frozen mid-crash. A new communication flooded the command center, not a tight beam to me, but a broadcast. The ancient being appeared on every screen, but its form was no longer calm and precise. It flickered violently, its edges blurring. The voice in my mind was different. The cold, stone-like certainty was gone. It was now layered with something new, something I never thought I'd hear from a godlike being that had come to unmake us. Confusion. And beneath that, a thread of raw, primal fear. The variable is recursive, its voice echoed, a tremor in its psychic tone. Asterisk, the potential reflects. It adapts. It learns. Asterisk. It wasn't looking at our planet anymore. Its sensors, its entire being, was focused on the map of our resonating souls. On the chaotic, beautiful, terrifying pattern we were making together. Asterisk, the name is not a static command. It is an algorithm. Evolving. Your collective consciousness is not merely stating its definition. It is rewriting it. In real time. In response to our presence. Asterisk. The truth hit me like a physical blow. This was the true meaning of unbound potential. It wasn't just that we could become anything. It was that what we were changed based on what we faced. The remnant's attempt to define us was, itself, becoming a new variable in our equation. We were reacting to their cure by evolving into something new, right now, and they had no idea what we were becoming. Their perfect, final solution was breaking against the shores of our identity. They had come to silence a single, terrifying word, only to find that the word was now writing new syllables all on its own. The gray wave began to shimmer, not with its own power, but with refracted light from Earth. The colors of our collective resonance were starting to bleed into it, twisting its monochrome perfection into something else. Something chaotic. Something human. My partner slowly removed her finger from the console. The decision was out of our hands now. The choice to speak was no longer a choice. It was a biological, spiritual imperative. The question was no longer if we would answer, but what we would become when we did. The ancient being on the screen, this last child of the creators, looked upon the storm of our awakening souls. And for the first time, its voice held not the fear of a keeper for a dangerous animal, but the awe of a scholar watching a supernova ignite. You are not a flaw in reality, it whispered into our minds, its tone filled with a terrifying wonder. Asterisk, you are its immune system. Or its death throes. We can no longer tell. Asterisk. The ship began to vibrate, its own structure struggling to process the new, chaotic data we were emitting. The fate of the galaxy no longer hung on a button being pressed. It hung on the next thought of 8 billion terrified, angry, hopeful, and defiant human hearts, all beginning to beat in a rhythm the universe had never heard before. The crescendo was building on its own, and all we could do was hold on and discover our own true name along with everyone else. The air in the command center was no longer still. It was charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. You could feel it on your skin, a prickling energy that wasn't coming from the machines. It was coming from us. From me. A low hum was building, not in the air, but in the marrow of my bones, a vibration that was the sum of every hope and every fear on the planet. We were a chorus finding our voice, and the song was one of pure, defiant existence. On the main screen, the remnant ship was shuddering, its perfect alien geometry starting to warp and flex as if caught in a gravitational tide. The gray wave of unnaming, that perfect, sterile silence, was now rippling with colors it was never meant to hold, the deep blue of human sorrow, the fiery red of our rage, the brilliant gold of our hope. We were not being erased. We were infecting their silence with our noise. My partner was no longer looking at the screens. She was looking at her own hands, and she was smiling. A small, tearful, wondrous smile. It's not a weapon, she whispered, and this time, everyone heard. It's a handshake. It's an introduction. They tried to read our name, and we're giving them our entire story. The general, the man who wanted to shout our name as a threat, slowly sank into his chair, the fight gone out of him. He understood now. You don't wield a handshake. You offer it. And then, the climax broke over us. It wasn't a sound. It was the absence of all sound, followed by a feeling of completion. Like a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for eons. The frantic, chaotic resonance from the global map didn't explode. It harmonized. Billions of individual frequencies wove themselves together into a single, complex, and breathtaking chord. It was the sound of humanity, not as a weapon, but as a whole. It was our true name, spoken not by a single voice, but by all of us, together. The effect on the remnant ship was instantaneous and profound. It didn't shatter. It didn't explode. It bloomed. The sharp, fearful angles of its hull softened, flowing into new, organic curves. The monotonous gray light that had threatened to unmake us blossomed into a swirling nebula of colors, mirroring the emotional spectrum of the human soul it was now immersed in. It was being redefined. Not by us, but by its contact with us. Our unbound potential wasn't destructive, it was catalytic. It didn't break things. It showed them what else they could be. The voice returned to my mind. But the fear was gone. The ancient being was still there, but its tone was filled with an awe so profound it felt like grief. We were wrong, it spoke, and the words were like a sigh of relief for the entire cosmos. Asterisk, we sought to correct a flaw. We found instead a missing function. Reality was not complete. It was, waiting. For a species that could not just be defined, but could define. That could choose. We came to silence an error. We have instead completed a circuit. Asterisk. The ship, now a thing of breathtaking, living light, began to pulse gently. And with each pulse, the gray wave didn't recede, it transformed. The star systems it had simplified, the Xylo's homeworld, the moon, Jupiter, they didn't return to what they were. That would have been impossible. But they didn't stay as sterile marbles. They began to reform, not into their old shapes, but into new ones. Strange, beautiful, and alive. The Xylo's world became a globe of intertwined crystalline trees that pulsed with a soft, internal light. Jupiter's new, calm surface swirled with patterns of impossible complexity. We hadn't just saved ourselves. We had, by introducing our chaotic potential, reintroduced possibility to the parts of the galaxy the remnant had tried to finalize. The remnant was not our enemy. They were the archivists of a finished universe. And we were the authors of the next one. A deep, profound peace settled over the command center. The threat was over. The galaxy wasn't living in fear anymore. It was waking up from a long, deep sleep. But then, my partner gasped. She was staring at her hand, her eyes wide. And as I watched, a tiny, perfect, and utterly new flower, with petals the color of starlight on water, bloomed from her palm. It grew from her skin, without a wound, without pain, a small miracle born of the energy that had just swept through us. We looked at the main screen, at the transformed remnant ship. The ancient being's final message came through. Soft and filled with a new purpose. Asterisk, the function of unbound potential is now active. It cannot be contained. It will propagate. The lexicon is not a weapon to be feared. It is a gift that has been given. You have not just spoken your name to the galaxy. You have given every species, every star, every rock, the permission to speak its own. Asterisk. And that was the final, breathtaking twist. We weren't the only ones. Our true name was a key that had unlocked not just our own potential, but the latent potential in everything. The universe was no longer a fixed, defined book. It was a story, and we had just turned the page. The fear was gone. The silence was gone. And in its place was a universe suddenly, wonderfully, and terrifyingly alive with infinite possibilities, all because one species, on a little blue world, had finally learned how to say hello. The flower in my partner's palm didn't wilt. It just sat there, a tiny, impossible star rooted in her skin, pulsing with a soft, warm light. We all stared, not in horror, but in a quiet, trembling awe. There was no pain in her eyes. Only wonder. It was the final, gentle proof that the old rules, the ones we thought were carved into the bedrock of reality, were gone. We hadn't broken the universe. We had simply reminded it how to grow. The change didn't stop with her. Across the planet, reports began to trickle in, not of destruction, but of quiet, impossible miracles. A child in a drought-stricken village, crying with relief as a fresh, clean spring bubbled up from the dust at her feet. An old, gnarled tree in a city park, suddenly blooming with fruit that tasted of memory and comfort. They weren't grand gestures. They were intimate, personal responses to a billion unspoken hopes. The galaxy wasn't living in fear anymore. It was listening. The general was the first to break the silence in the command center. He let out a long, slow breath. The sound of a man who had spent his whole life preparing for a war that had just been cancelled. He looked at his own hands, as if expecting a weapon to sprout from them, and found only his own, calloused fingers. All those battle plans, he muttered, shaking his head. All that strategy, for what? To fight a future that just wanted to give us flowers. He didn't sound defeated. He sounded free. The remnant ship didn't leave. It settled into a high orbit around Earth, a silent, beautiful moon of living light. It was no longer a scalpel. It was a student. And we were its teachers. The communication between us was no longer a confrontation. It was a conversation. They showed us the deep history of the cosmos, the silent, stable eons where everything was perfect, and nothing ever changed. And we, in turn, shared our art. Our music. Our messy, chaotic, and brilliant stories of love and loss. We showed them Shakespeare and rock and roll, we showed them a child's first steps and an old couple's last dance. We showed them what it meant to be human. The Galactic Federation's quarantine dissolved not with a bang, but with a whisper of tentative, overwhelming curiosity. They didn't send diplomats or warships. They sent historians, artists, and philosophers. The youngers were now the elders, the ones who held the secret the entire universe had forgotten, that the most powerful force in existence wasn't destruction, but creation. That a name wasn't a label to be feared, but a story to be told. The galactic fear had been transformed into a galactic awakening. My partner and I left the bunker for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. We stood on the mountainside, the cold, clean air filling our lungs. The sky above was no longer a ceiling. It was an open door. The stars weren't distant points of light anymore. They were neighbors, their lights twinkling with a new, curious energy. We could feel it, a faint, humming connection to all of it, a web of potential that now stretched across the cosmos. She held up her hand, the starlight flower still glowing softly. "It's not just us, is it?" she said, her voice soft. "The Xylos, they're not gone." As if in answer, a feeling washed over us, not from the remnant, but from the direction of the former Xylos system. It wasn't words. It was a sensation of profound gratitude, of a deep, crystalline peace. They hadn't been erased. They had been transformed, reborn into a new kind of life, one of pure, resonant harmony. They were the first of the new creations. They were the first verse in the new song. That was the final takeaway, the truth that settled deep in my bones. We had spent so long being afraid of our own power, terrified that our unbound potential was a curse. We thought our true name was a weapon that could shatter stars. And in a way, it was. It shattered the old, cold, and finished stars to make way for new ones. It wasn't a power we wielded. It was a responsibility we carried. The power to not just live in the universe, but to help it become more than it was. We walked down the mountain, back towards the lights of a world that was forever changed. The fear was gone. The silence was gone. In its place was a gentle, constant hum, the sound of 8 billion stories being written, of a planet healing, of a galaxy learning to dream again. The story of the syllable that shattered stars wasn't a story about how the galaxy learned to fear humanity. It was the story of how we all learned to hope. And the most beautiful part? The story, our story, was only just beginning.